Hi, and welcome to Total Rewind, a podcast for movie maniacs. I'm D-Man, joined by CP, and we're really excited because today we're actually kicking off this brand new podcast segment. And CP, I'm going to throw it over to you. Let's go ahead and just introduce the movie up front so everybody knows what this is, and then we can kind of explain what we're going to do.
Sounds great. This week we are going to be talking about an 80s classic. You probably have seen it. If you haven't, then you can't love movies. From 1984, The Karate Kid, starring Ralph Macchio, Elizabeth Shue, and it was directed by a very famous director from the 70s and the 80s, John G. Avildsen.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, is he the guy that directed Rocky?
He is, and we will talk about later because that was part of the inspiration for doing The Karate Kid.
Okay, I thought so. And then we can't forget good old William Zabka.
Of course.
I mean,
we can't.
Yeah, you can't forget him. I mean, he's, the renaissance right now of Cobra Kai. So,
yeah, right?
We'll get to that too. But yeah, it's pretty exciting. And I'm really thrilled because this segment of the podcast is us taking a look back at movies from the 80s and before. And we're going to kind of re-examine the movies through the lens of today and see if they still hold up and if they're movies that we would recommend that people who haven't seen them today should go check out.
That's why we call it Total Rewind.
Yeah, and that's the objective of the show is we want to see, hey, there's a lot of old movies. And trust me, we've made a list. There's a lot of old movies and we really want to examine, we can only watch so many and there's new movies coming out all the time, especially with all these streaming services and everything. So, which ones are the ones that are worth going back and rewatching or watching for the first time? So that's it. That's the objective of the show. And we're really excited because we have a few different angles we want to look at with each movie we do. But in today's episode, The Karate Kid. So first off, I want to throw it over to you. We both just watched the movie. And one of the things that I'm really excited about, and you actually did this when you watched it, is we will be live tweeting as we watch movies each week for the new podcast episodes that we're going to do. So to our listeners, if you're interested in following along as we're watching the movies, you can follow us on Twitter and we'll be live tweeting, as well as if you would like to join the conversation, you can watch the movie. We'll make sure to announce what time we're going to hit play. And you can actually hit play yourself and kind of watch the movie along with us. So we thought that might be fun.
That way we can all enjoy the movie together.
So having watched it, we both rewatched the movie. I want to throw it over to you for your initial thoughts on the rewatch. What really stood out to you? What was something that, if you hadn't seen it in a long time, that you kind of totally forgot about?
Well, to be honest, I haven't seen it in a long time. Probably the last time I actually watched The Karate Kid, I think I watched it with my dad when I was in middle school.
So that's a while.
It's been a really long time for me. And I think the first thing that stuck out to me is in so many ways, it is just quintessential 80s filmmaking to the extreme. And that's kind of a good thing and a bad thing, because I think for one of the things for me is kind of watching that, right? It brought me back to that decade.
Right.
So,
but at the same time, it dates the movie a little bit. It does feel like an 80s film. So it does feel like an older movie, right? Even though the themes are universal and it's still a movie that I think people could watch today and enjoy just as much. I mean, it is a kind of a, quote unquote, a relic of its time, right? Yeah. And I think that's, the thing that really stood out to me on my initial thoughts was I really enjoyed the soundtrack. It was really great. It was a lot of 80s music. There were a couple songs in there that obviously are associated with this movie specifically, but there were some other ones that
Esposito song.
Right. Yeah. And, but there's some other ones that are just, 80s music. It reminds me a little bit of Fast Times at Ridgemont High, where the soundtrack was just amazing.
Yeah.
So that really stood out. And then the other thing, which this is just kind of note, is I didn't know this, but Ralph Macchio was 22 or 23 when he filmed this movie. And he seriously looks like
a 16-year-old.
Yeah. I think he's even playing a 17-year-old in the movie because I think they actually celebrate his 18th birthday. And I can't. Maybe I'm wrong because I know
thought
he gets
I
his
thought he
license.
turned 16 because he gets his license.
Yeah, he gets his license. But I want to say maybe I'll rewatch it again because I'm like I want to say Miyagi says like happy 18th birthday or something. So I don't know. But anyway, he looks like a 16-year-old, and I was blown away not knowing that he was older when he filmed this. And it's funny too because if you see Ralph Macchio today, he almost seems like, you know, hopefully you're watching this, Ralph, but you seem a little short. And when you actually look, he looks like a tall, dangly kid, or not dangly, gangly, which is kind of funny.
That's true. I never really thought about it, to be honest. But I do also think that was kind of more of a commonplace back then. It seems like, if my memory serves me right, a lot of kind of in the 80s and before, teen movies were played by non-teens.
Yes. And then the other, I want to say there's another example. Let me think for 1 second. Oh, yes, I remember. In Modern Family, the sitcom, the girl that plays Haley, Sarah Hyland, I think she also was playing like a 15 or 16-year-old, but she was like 21 in season 1. So
Wow.
that still goes on. That still happens.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. So watching you, right? I mean, obviously the 80s music is a big part of it. The 80s fashion is a big part of it. I was actually kind of blown away. There's a part where Daniel is wearing a plaid shirt like me with camo army pants. And I was like, wow, I never would have thought that would have passed like the fashion test, but you know, guess it was just a different place, different time, different people.
Yeah. I mean, hey, they still got, it's the 80s, right? Kids are riding their bikes. It's amazing. I mean, granted, he does get his license and he gets gifted a car, but at the end of the day, I mean, he is riding a bike around, which is, you know, pretty 80s, pretty 90s.
They go to the, you know, like there's that scene where they go to the arcade and like how 80s is that, you know.
I wish arcades were still around. They were fun.
And then to top it off, the movie actually has 2 80s style montages, which, I mean, the montage was like, you know, the bread and butter of 80s cinema. So the fact that they had enough, you know, self-awareness to put in 2 really kind of cements it in what they were trying to do at the time.
And it does make sense because it's the director of Rocky.
Yeah. And
so,
yeah, I mean, you know, you got to
Rocky, come on, montages. Yeah, I mean, it's got to happen.
Yeah.
So anyway, what I wanted to jump into, you know, our first major segment on this episode is on culture. Now, something that really stood out to me was how relevant some of the quotes and some of the elements from the Karate Kid are still relevant in today's culture. Wax on, wax off, you know, the crane, sweep the leg.
Yeah.
You know, these things are still said. Like it can't be understated the cultural impact that the original Karate Kid had on our lexicon.
Yeah. Well, I mean, case in point, right? This inspired, you know, the series from YouTube, which is now on Netflix, inspired by the show. So clearly there's value in watching this for anyone who hasn't seen it on the basis of, you know, there is this cultural pop culture, you know, kind of you know, collective reference. You know, anytime you walk by someone and they're waxing their car, you know, someone always makes some joke about wax on and wax off, right? Like that's just the world we live in. And you need to kind of understand where those things come from, because for, you know, the same quote being relevant for almost 40 years later, like they did something right.
Right. And then just little things like Daniel-san is still like, if you hear that, you think Karate Kid. Or even Mr. Miyagi.
I was going to say, right, anytime, you know, a mentor is referenced as a Mr. Miyagi, you know exactly who that person is. He's such a great archetype.
Yeah, I think, you know, number 1 is probably Yoda. But then after that, you have a couple of them and Miyagi's right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, if you ever hear that, you're like, oh, yeah, it's Karate Kid, of course.
He has that cryptic style of teaching. He has all those very wise sayings, which are somewhat up for interpretation. And you find out that he has these total badass powers lurking beneath this very calm, and gentle, and almost feeble exterior. Like when he, you know, saves Daniel from getting jumped by the Cobra Kais.
Right. And, you know, which is also a really cool scene, because if you think about it, he's like this old man kicking like teenage ass, you know, he's like beating up teenagers. I'm like, that's amazing. So today you'd probably get arrested, I think. I don't know. You'd have to be stealthed about it. But back then it was like, hey, don't be a jerk, or
No, and in fact, right, they
I'll
even own
destroy
it
you.
when he goes into the JoJo. He's like, "Hey, you're the guy who beat up my kids."
Yeah. Or even like you think about that guy, I forget his name in the movie. Is it Fleece? What's his name?
Yeah.
The Cobra Kai dojo leader. He even says like, yeah, he says something along the lines of, hey, if he doesn't show up for the tournament, then it's open season. You're like, what?
Right. Another sign of the times, like there is a blatant acknowledging of the acceptability of bullying, which just doesn't fly in culture today,
No, it's weird because, if you actually look at Daniel throughout the movie, I mean, it's not like they make fun of him. Like they actually beat him up. He has like a black eye. He's got like scrapes
multiple times.
Yeah,
and what's weird is there's so many adults in the film who just acknowledge it as the way that it is. His mom is very accepting of it to some ways. Where I mean, like a mom now would be down there at the school, like, demanding action. When he goes to the dinner with, and gets the spaghetti spilled on him, like everyone just kind of laughs, like, "Oh, okay, whatever, kid."
No, I feel like today people would stand up and be like, what a jerk. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
And back then it was like, hey, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, shit happens.
Yeah, right. I guess that's just the 80s mentality that, all Gen Xers were kind of raised with.
So, I was just really fascinated watching it again, knowing how culturally relevant that film is and still remains, and if we're talking about culture, I think we also have to acknowledge Cobra Kai, which, is so far, I think, through 3 seasons, but it's renewed for a 4th.
Mm-hmm.
And, people do realize that The Karate Kid is an ongoing series and, there's multiple movies, even, a remake with Jaden Smith and Jackie Chan. But when you think about its cultural relevance, it hasn't faded. In fact, with the, emergence of Cobra Kai, I'd say that it's even grown. And, that kind of makes the original Karate Kid even more, required viewing, I guess.
Yeah. And doing some research for the film, right? They talked about at the time how the film was so important in kind of putting martial arts and karate within the United States on the map. And I mean, I know that when you were growing up, and when I were growing up, obviously, like, I knew tons of people who did karate, and the whole concept of martial arts was very mainstream. And that really goes back to this film in '84.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like the, Jurassic Park effect on, what was that, paleontology?
Yeah.
Where it was like, hey, Jurassic Park came out and all these kids were like, wow, I want to learn about dinosaurs. You see the Karate Kid, you're like, I want to learn karate.
Yeah.
Not only for, and I think that's, obviously the movie kind of hints at this, especially through Miyagi's teachings, but that karate is more than just the physical ability to master these moves, but really kind of a, internal discipline that allows you to kind of realize your full self.
Exactly.
So, yeah, it was, I don't know, it was pretty neat. It was fun watching it again, knowing now how culturally relevant it still is today.
Exactly.
But something else I wanted to talk about is also the effects from the film. So this effects kind of encompasses, sometimes it'll be like digital effects, sometimes it'll be practical effects, sometimes it'll be fight scenes, it might be music, whatever. But kind of the mechanics of how the movie works. So I wanted to ask you, do you think the movie holds up in that regard?
I think that's actually one of the failures of the film, in the sense that, in the almost 40 years since, we have developed this whole culture, subculture of cinema, kind of like MMA films and boxing films. And it's very, I don't want to use the word amateur, but it feels very basic in terms of the way that they film the combat. In fact, in many ways, like the whole film is building to this, karate tournament at the end of the film, and it's 10 minutes of film.
Yeah, it's rather anticlimactic. I mean, they get to the point where like he injures his leg, but obviously there's the famous line, sweep the leg, and that kid does it. And he's like, I'm
Mhm.
sorry, Daniel. Like, I didn't want to do it. So there's like a little dramatic energy right there. But other than that, I mean, it happens very, very fast.
Yeah.
Before you know it, he's back out there.
Well, and I think part of it is, right, as an audience, we've been desensitized to what the potential of these hand-to-hand combat scenes are, right? I mean, a couple of months ago we watched Mortal Kombat, which has some of these elaborate, drawn out fight sequences that
Yeah.
are flashy and stylistic, and this is not that. I mean, in many ways this kind of inspired that whole genre of filmmaking, and it's the foundation, so we need to know it, we need to acknowledge it and respect it, but it doesn't, if you're watching this as an 8-year-old kid, I think you're going to be disappointed because it's not the karate movie that it could be, given,
or even that it was viewed as in its time.
right?
But today, I mean, I like something I grew up with, and I'm not saying that the karate moves are more correct or even better, but I mean, I felt like there was a little bit more drama, especially at the end, was like the Three Ninjas. Where at the end, I feel like the film itself is doing more for dramatic reach, not necessarily the karate moves, but it feels more dramatic. There's a little bit more at stake. These kids' lives and all this different stuff. Where in the Karate Kid, it's they're in a points system, a tournament. No one's lives at risk here. Daniel's just trying to overcome his bullies, and that's what sends him back out there. But I mean, even the actual end, he literally does the crane move. Johnny runs over, hands him the trophy. They hold him up, and he's like, "Miyagi, we did it." Cut to black.
It almost feels like it's cut too soon. Like you need like another minute of two of kind of the like building out the moment and the celebratory, right? Like it ends so quick. It's like there was a producer in the background, like, wrap it up, guys. We're over budget, like, cut it now.
Something funny though, I looked this up too, but I didn't know this. This movie started filming in like mid-October and it was done by mid-December.
Wow.
So maybe they were. They filmed it. I want to say, like, if you actually look at the dates, it's actually, they filmed the whole thing in less than 2 months. And this movie is like all film. There's, it's not like they're doing like green screen and blue screen and like all this crazy stuff.
It's all like actual locations in the valley that you can go to today.
Yeah. So I don't know. It was interesting, but I have to agree with you that as far as the effects go, the fighting in particular, I was not disappointed. I just don't know that it's something that would really, get people excited today the way it did in its own time. And part of it is actually the film making pacing. I mean, they just move through it so fast. Like even, the inconsistencies, like in the end fight with Johnny, he does the crane move and like kicks him in the head, right? And they're like, point, win. But like right before that, Johnny like punched him in the face and they didn't give Johnny a point. And I was like, I don't know what's going on here.
Well, and I mean, the thing that like Daniel masters the crane, you would think that there would be a little bit more moment of recognition of his achieving this signature move that, we see Miyagi doing as a master, and what a great opportunity to kind of draw it out and kind of recognizing his growth. And we kind of just run right through it without taking the moment that I think is warranted by the character.
But something that I really did enjoy is actually the middle section of the movie. I liked the pacing there, where he kind of develops his relationship with Mr. Miyagi. He's taking in some of the training because, especially early on when the training begins, even myself, I know what happens. But, Mr. Miyagi has him doing all these chores and doing all this different stuff. And I was like, if it was me as a kid, I would eventually be like, are you just trying to get me to
am I just doing chores?
Yeah. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And Daniel does get there, but what a great scene though, where, he kind of shows him like, how to do the moves and what it is.
I think it's probably one of the coolest ones in the movie, because we see his style of teaching and how, through muscle memory and making him do these things that we thought were menial tasks, there is actually this greater purpose behind it.
And I love
him without training him. That's cool.
learning, Mr. Miyagi's story. Obviously, he has, a soft spot for Daniel. He does get him a birthday cake. He gets him presents on his birthday. They end up having like a really strong bond. And Miyagi, all the way through, right? All the way to the very end, ends up saying something along the lines of like, win or lose, you already won. You proved everybody wrong. And it's not really about winning. Like, you don't have to go out there and win this to be proud of what you've done. But, as far as pacing for the movie, I really liked that middle section. But yeah, the end to me is rushed. It's a little bit too quick.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Totally agree.
So finally, I wanted to throw to you a little bit about the story. So I want to talk a little bit about how the characters, do they still stand the test of time? Are these characters that we should look up to, that, we should take value from their stories? And, in that regard, is it still worth watching?
I think yes and no. I think when we look at the character of Miyagi, he is a great, he's like the epitome of the archetype of that mentor role.
Right. Yeah.
He teaches Daniel not about martial arts only. He teaches him about life. He teaches him about accepting who he is. He gives him confidence. He teaches him about growing up and becoming, a man, right?
Yeah.
He teaches him about, kind of that Uncle Ben phrase of, with power comes responsibility. And you have to, you want to, if you're going to do things, you have to commit 100%. You have to do them for the right reasons. That's all totally valuable. And in a lot of ways, I think that role that he plays is still really relevant to people, in any way, kind of when there's the generational passing of knowledge. As far as Daniel, he feels very rooted in the 80s. I mean, I always thought it was weird at the beginning.
Yeah.
How upset he is that he's leaving New Jersey for California. I'm like, I've been to New Jersey.
I might be a little excited. Yeah.
I've been to California. I mean, it seems like you're getting a pretty sweet deal there, man.
I mean, I get it. Like, if you have to leave your friends and stuff, and like home is home. But, and I mean, we can actually speak to that, right? Like, we've both lived in Indiana and then came to California.
Yeah.
So, do I want to go back to Indiana? No. But
now, the one interesting thing about Daniel's character that I noticed was the fact that while he gets frustrated, right, especially with his bullying, in many ways, it is kind of admirable because it does not deter him, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool because I feel like in many ways, a movie today that was looking at bullying, it would be very much about embrace kind of the fact that Daniel, had become how he was being unfairly targeted, how he, and you could almost see a character kind of developing a victim mindset, which Daniel doesn't really seem to, despite there's a whole third of the movie with people just kind of beating the crap out of him repeatedly.
Well, I mean, he does at a certain point before Miyagi kind of takes him under his wing. It is kind of avoiding, right? Yeah. And who wouldn't, right? Like, if you're going to get your ass kicked, like, you're not going to want to go over there. But I mean, it does kind of impact his, relationship with Allie. And, that's kind of a common theme throughout the love story is, this kind of, right. It starts off with Johnny showing up and breaking her radio. And then, right, like you said, he kind of avoids them, which, means he doesn't get to spend time with her. And then there's the scene at the dinner.
The dinner.
So, but I know what you're saying when it comes to bullying, right? Like, the movie itself kind of empowers the idea of like, hey, make sure you stand up for yourself. Don't just adopt that victim mentality. And right, the movie's saying like, hey, there's a lot we can do in self-improvement to make ourselves better and give us the ability to stand up for ourselves when the moment calls for it. And, it's nice that I think the story structures that around the tournament because it eliminates bullying, kind of in the wild, right, at school.
Yeah.
His, Johnny's friends even kind of hold him back a couple times, or they're like, hey, they said no bullying. And they're kind of like, let's settle this, like sports are, like, let's settle this on the court, or in this case at the tournament.
Yeah.
And they do. And to some degree, right, the tournament also validates that even though these kids are bullies, that is learned. And they kind of express that at the tournament, where the one kid is like, Daniel, I'm sorry. And then at the very end, Johnny even brings the trophy over and is like, you did it, Daniel. Like, you kind of won our respect, but not
which
that
is exactly what Miyagi tells him. He's like, if you stand and fight and hold your ground, you're going to earn their respect regardless.
Yeah, and not that you need it, right? They are bullies, and especially whatever the guy's name was, who is the sensei of Cobra Kai. He's a dick, right? I forget. Yeah, I forget his
something. What is it?
Lease or something. And he, he even says he has a saying at the end where he's like, "No mercy" or something.
Kreese,
like
that's it.
Yeah, Kreese. And he's like, "No mercy" or whatever, and. There's not, as far as the story's concerned, there's not really a place for that type of mentality anymore. But I think there is something to be said about the overall theme of self-empowerment, standing up for yourself. And, that's universal. I don't think that's a relic of the 80s. I think that's as relevant today as, has ever been.
Yeah, no, I would agree. That's definitely true.
So, let's go ahead and throw it over to you then. If, we're looking at this as a film 80s and before, would you recommend this film to people who haven't seen it, or particularly kids that, people that are growing up now? That obviously we have our own stories that are being made today, but is this one they should go back in time and, check out?
I don't know, in 5 years from now, I don't know that it will be as much. I think part of the reason why it really is still somewhat relevant is the fact that now there's a whole generation of parents who grew up watching this film. And I think it's a good way to connect and understand kind of that generations who are kind of, their parents now, they're raising kids.
Right.
As kids, they watch the movie. And I think it's an awesome way to connect and kind of understand, again, where they're coming from. But if I'm saying you need to watch it as a filmmaker because you're going to learn so much and it's going to shape your understanding of cinema and the potential of storytelling, no, I don't think that it holds up in those ways.
Yeah, I actually agree with you about that, in the sense that, yes, in terms of filmmaking, I don't think it's pushing any boundaries. It's filmed pretty stock, right? Using standard techniques. It does look a certain way, like it has an 80s vibe to it, but that's probably just the way things were filmed at the time, more so than it is this, dramatic artistic choice. And then, I would say that its relevance really stems from its cultural importance. So obviously Cobra Kai is out. There are a lot of phrases from the movie that we still say today. And if that's something that you're interested in, then I think definitely it's worth going back and checking out. I'm assuming if you've seen Cobra Kai, there are tons and tons of references all the way back. I think they even use clips of Mr. Miyagi in Cobra Kai. And it's definitely worth going back and seeing. But yeah, as just the filmmaking itself, even like we said, the fight scenes are a little dated. They're not as dramatic as I think they were when it came out. But yeah, just for cultural relevance, I think the movie does still warrant a viewing. But yeah, if you're just a filmmaker trying to figure out what old movies you should definitely check out, I don't think this is the one.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But I had fun. I mean, Total Rewind, we got to go back and watch a really awesome movie, because there's no denying Karate Kid is great. I enjoyed watching it. So is it required viewing? Maybe not, but it was fun to go back and then get a chance to discuss it with you. I hope that everyone tuning in kind of enjoyed our conversation on the entire movie.
Let us know your thoughts on
exactly
Karate Kid. And more importantly, what a great opportunity for us to plug it. The next movie that D-Man and I are going to be watching is, I know, one of his favorites and one of mine, Raiders of the Lost Ark. So get ready to watch along with us. And I mean, let's not kid ourselves. If you haven't seen Raiders, then you really can't call yourself a movie fan in any way. So
I feel like
change that.
Yeah, if you haven't seen Raiders, go check out our social media at Film Comp Podcast or Filmmakers Compass. You can just type that into Google. I'm sure it'll find us. But I would go check that out. We're going to let you guys know what time we'll be watching the movie. CP and I may be watching it together. We may be watching it separately. But if you've never seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, make sure to keep your eye out for the watch times and join us, because you'll enjoy it.
Definitely. So until next time, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Total Rewind, and we hope that you're going to tune in for the next one.